This morning I'm going to speak a little bit about Daniel, just chapter 1. I'm going to be working on some sermons, but there's so much to preach on in Daniel, and I hadn't paid attention to this in the past, but the historical stuff of Daniel, the first 6 chapters that talk about the stories of Daniel, also apply to the end of times. I always thought when I would read Daniel chapter 12, verse, I think it's 19, that says that the book was sealed to the end of time, I always thought it only referred to the prophecies. But that's not the case. Everything in the book of Daniel applies to our times. And there's magnificent, beautiful and deep spiritual lessons in the stuff that happened to Daniel and his companions. I'm going to start a little bit farther back. Abraham was called from God out of, what was the name of the city that Abraham was called out of? Ur, of the Chaldeans, right? That's in Mesopotamia. That's close to Babylon. And it was a place of idol worship. And out of that place, God found this man, Abraham. And Abraham is just, when you get a chance, read Genesis. I was reading that this week. Beautiful, beautiful, powerful faith. Imagine being 75 years old, and God calls you and says, come out of everything you know. Leave behind all of that, your culture, your family, and all that, and come to a new land, and I'm going to make a great nation out of you. You're 75 years old, you don't have children, and he's saying he's going to make a great nation out of you when you're 75. And Abraham obeys, packs up his belongings, his servants, his wife, his nephew, and heads out to a distant land that he didn't know, hadn't been there before, all because God talked to him, he listened, and he follows whatever God says. Later, we see a whole bunch of his experiences in Egypt, with the Philistines also, and all the people, Sodom and Gomorrah, all his interaction, wherever he went, he would build an altar to Jehovah, the true God, the Creator God, and his life was a witness to all these people who were idol worshipers and had all these false gods. And in his interactions, you see, we know that God is with you. And we see God speaking to Pharaoh, warning him not to touch Abraham's wife. We see God speaking to Abimelech. He was the Philistines, king of the Philistines, saying, don't touch his wife. And everything, even through his mistakes and everything, this man was a living testimony to the true and living God everywhere he went. God says, circumcise yourself and circumcise everybody in your household. He does it the same day. Never hesitated. God says, go and sacrifice your firstborn Isaac, the son of the promise. Go sacrifice him to me at Mount Moriah. And he does it immediately. He wakes up early in the morning, packs up, and goes. Amazing faith and obedience of Abraham. And God says that through his seed, he was going to bless what? All the nations of the world. And what was the seed? Eventually that was Israel. And through Israel, God wanted to do the same thing that he did through Abraham. Be a witness to all those nations that were worshiping false gods, that didn't know him. But sadly, as time passed, they fell away from that. They fell short. They failed at glorifying God and representing God to these idol-worshiping nations. Now, there was several instances in the history of Israel where they did. God was able to work through them when they had a God-fearing king, when they were walking with God, and God was able to do marvelous things. One of those examples is found in Isaiah chapter 36, if you turn there with me. Isaiah chapter 36. There was a king in Assyria. His name was Sennacherib. He was after Tiglath-Pileser. Tiglath-Pileser was the guy that went and they wiped out Tiglath-Pileser was a powerful Assyrian king. He made Assyria powerful. He went and conquered all these different nations. And Israel had already been wiped out, the northern tribes. Only Judah and a little bit of Benjamin was left in around Jerusalem and what was known as Judah. But then comes this new threat, Sennacherib. He's a new king in Assyria. And he marches again. He sends one of his messengers to, they call him the Rabshakeh. And he says to them, thus says the great king, the king of Assyria, what confidence is this in which you trust? So he sends a messenger to them. He's conquered all these people around them, and he's about to go after them now, Jerusalem. And the king at the time was King Hezekiah. Hezekiah feared God. He had taken away the places of idol worshiping. He had brought the people back to worshiping God, Jehovah. And he had worked against, he did reformation, and he was a powerful king. He had a great army. He had a fortified city and a lot of things. But listen to this. It says, what confidence is this in which you trust? The messenger's telling Hezekiah and their people. I say you speak of having plans and power for war, but they are mere words. Now, in whom do you trust that you rebel against me? Look, you are trusting in that staff, the broken reed, Egypt, on which if a man leans, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who trust in him. But if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he who has high places, is it not he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah has taken away, and said to Judah and Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar? Now, therefore, I urge you, give a pledge to my master, the king of Assyria, and I will give you 2,000 horses if you are able on your part to put riders on them. Now, how then will you repel one captain of the least of my master's servants and put your trust in Egypt for chariots and horsemen? Have I now come up without the Lord against the land to destroy it? The Lord said to me, go up against this land and destroy it. So he sends a messenger. He's intimidating them. And he's saying, what are you trusting in? If you want to match strength for strength, number for numbers, you're done. We're more powerful than you. Even if you were trusting in Egypt, they can't help you. And then he goes as far as to say, are you trusting in the Lord? Why was he saying that? Because all the people around him knew Israel's history. They had heard what had happened to Egypt. They had heard what had happened to all the kingdoms that were in that place that they had taken over. How God defended them, how God fought their battles, how they only had to march around a city and then the walls would crumble. Jericho. How God would make hail fall from the sky and kill more enemies than the soldiers would. They knew all these stories. But they dared go against Israel because they thought they were weak. Look, they had just destroyed the northern tribes and wiped them out. And they said, God's not with them anymore. And then he was basically saying that God's not with you anymore. You're trusting in God. God sent me to destroy you. And they're shaking in their boots. The messengers that were at the top and the scribes and stuff say, hey, speak to us in Aramaic, please. We understand Aramaic. Don't speak to us in Hebrew so the people don't understand. And he says, well, my king sent me to speak to those people because they're the ones that are going to be drinking and eating their own waste when we siege you. It was very intimidating. And then he goes and he gives a list of all these things. He says, I'm reading from verse 18. The Lord will beware lest Hezekiah persuade you, saying, the Lord will deliver us. Has any one of the gods of the nations delivered its land from the land of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvim? Indeed, have they delivered Samaria from my hand? Who among all the gods of these lands have delivered their countries from my hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem from my hand? So he gives a list of all these people that he's already conquered, and he names their gods, and he says their gods weren't able to protect them. And what makes you think your God is going to protect you? I'm going to jump ahead to chapter 37, verse 10 says, Thus you shall speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah, saying, Do not let your God in whom you trust deceive you, saying, Jerusalem shall not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Look, you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all lands by utterly destroying them, and shall you be delivered? Have the gods of the nations delivered those whom my fathers have destroyed? And he gives a list of all those people they had conquered again. And then Hezekiah does a beautiful prayer. In that prayer, he says, verse 19, Truly, Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste all the nations and their lands, and have cast their gods into the fire, gods with a small g, for they were not gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore, they destroyed them. Now, therefore, O Lord our God, save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you are the Lord, you alone. So, Hezekiah is asking for God's protection. He's saying, look, he's pointing all the circumstances to him. These guys just came and blasphemed your name, Lord. And he's talking about you like you're one of their false gods that are made with human hands. Please defend us, Lord, so that they can know you are alone our God. And Isaiah comes with a message. Verse 23, I love this verse. And Isaiah is saying, I'm going to read from 22. This is the word of the Lord, which he has spoken concerning him. The virgin, the daughter of Zion, has despised you, laughed you to scorn. The daughter of Jerusalem has shaken her head behind your back. 23. Whom have you reproached and blasphemed? Against whom have you raised your voice and lifted up your eyes on high? Against the Holy One of Israel. And he's saying, boy, who are you talking about? You don't know what you're saying. You don't know who you're talking about right now. And he gives a prophecy at the end in verse 34, 35. By the way that he came, by the same shall he return, and he shall not come into this city, says the Lord. For I will defend this city to save it for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. Verse 36 and 37 show how God answered. Then the angel of the Lord went out and killed in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. And when people arose early in the morning, they were corpses, all dead. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went away, returned home, and remained at Nineveh. Now it came to pass, as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god, that his sons Adramelech and Sharezer struck him down with the sword, and they escaped into the land of Ararat. Then Esarhaddon, his son, reigned in his place. So God answers by sending one angel and destroys 185,000 men, practically his entire army, sends them packing back home, and then his sons finish him off in the temple of his God. So God defended his people. The next chapter talks about something that happens with King Hezekiah. And I'm going to get to the point real quick. I'm sorry, I have to tell you all this background. This is just the introduction. Yeah, I'm sorry. I know this might be a little boring, but the next story is Hezekiah gets sick. And Isaiah is sent to his house, and God tells him, hey, you're going to die. Get your house in order. And Hezekiah starts crying and pleading and talking to God. Hey, I've served you. I've been faithful. I've done good. Why are you doing this? Give me, please have mercy. And he cries. And God hears him and says, I'll give you 15 more years. And you're going to have peace and you're going to have health in those 15 years. And Isaiah turns around and tells him that and gives him a natural remedy. Put some figs or something on there, and it's going to heal. And God did a miracle. And he asked him, for a sign, and there was a sundial. Back then, that's the clocks they had, was a sundial. The shadow was marking what time it was of the day. And Hezekiah asked God to turn back the sundial 10 degrees. And he does it. And in chapter 39, it says this, Isaiah 39. At that time, Merodach-Baladan, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent letters and a present to Hezekiah, for he heard that he had been sick, and he had recovered. And he had recovered. Now, 2 Chronicles 32:31. I'm just going to tell you. I don't have to read it. 2 Chronicles 32:31. If you have a chance, look it up. It gives more details of why the Babylonians had sent messengers, and they sent like a little group of people to go and visit Hezekiah, because they had seen the wonder that God had done. You see, when the sundial went back 10 degrees, God grabbed the earth, right, and rotated it backwards. That's what we know happened. It's not that the sun moves. And do you think the Israelites were the only ones that saw that? The whole earth saw that. The Babylonians especially always were paying attention to the skies and to astrology and all this stuff. And when they see this, news spreads around the Middle East that Jehovah had done this as a sign that he was healing Hezekiah. And they had also heard of God's miraculous defeat of Sennacherib. Back then, Babylon was still not a superpower. It wasn't ruling the Middle East yet. It was just a small power. They were barely starting to rebel against the Assyrians. And they sent messengers at that time. And number 2, and as Hezekiah was pleased with them and showed them the house of his treasures, the silver and gold, the spices and precious ointment, and all his armory, all that was found among his treasures. There was nothing in his house or in all his dominion that Hezekiah did not show them. Then Isaiah the prophet went to King Hezekiah and said to him, "What did these men say? And from where did they come to you?" So Hezekiah said, "They came to me from a far country, from Babylon." And he said, "What have they seen in your house?" So Hezekiah answered, "They have seen all that is in my house. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not shown them." Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and what your fathers have accumulated until this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord." Verse 7, "And they shall take away some of your sons who will descend from you, whom you will beget, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." So Hezekiah said to Isaiah, "The word of the Lord which you have spoken is good." For he said, "At least there will be peace and truth in my days." Yeah, so, my goodness, imagine if somebody came and told you, "You know what, Tricia? Your grandchildren, this and this and this is going to happen to them. Something terrible." And Tricia says, "Oh, that's great news. At least I'm not going to see it. I'm going to be dead by then." That's a pretty selfish attitude, right? That mistake. God had worked a miracle in that man's life. 2 miracles. 3 miracles that we just read about. Sending an angel to defeat his enemy at his doorstep, healing him from death, and reversing the rotation of the sun. And when those people came to him and said, "Hey, we heard of what happened. Tell us." What did he do? He did show and tell. Hey, look, have I showed you my horses? Let me show you my horses. Hey, look, you see all these shields up here? They're all gold. Yeah, my great-grandfather Solomon did all this. And come here, look at the throne. Isn't it beautiful? Hey, let me show you my house. And, and he went and he showed him everything that he was proud of. What was the one thing he should have talked about that he didn't mention? Right. Abraham once with his servants went and defeated 4 or 5 kings that had defeated Sodom and Gomorrah and liberated them and everything. And when they tried to honor him, he said, I won't even take a shoelace. I don't want you to say that you enrich me instead of my God. Abraham was always worried about the glory of God. And this man comes and shows him everything that God has given him. But he's only looking at the material things and he's proud of everything. He's showing off instead of that opportunity he had to witness to these people and speak of them about the true God. He wasted it. And sadly, the prophet comes with a message of God looking into the future, and he tells him, those men that you just brought, their people one day are going to take everything that you just showed them. You're so proud of those things. Those things are going to be carried away. And your children, the descendants of you, they're going to be eunuchs in their palace. And it's a sad thing. Abraham always witnessed to God. This man and Israel, he's representing Israel, that was their fault. They had fallen into sin. They had gotten comfortable. They had mixed with idolatry. And the one job they had to glorify God, God wanted to do great things. Exactly what had just happened, God wanted to do with them. He wanted to exalt them. Remember the blessings in Deuteronomy 28? You'll be the head, not the tail. Your enemy will come at you from one way and they will flee from in 7 different directions. Everything you do is going to be blessed. I'm going to multiply everything. Your children, you're going to be so blessed. What was the purpose of God blessing His people? To be a witness to the world. When they come and inquire of you, why are you living like this? I mean, what happened? That's exactly the opportunity he had. He had all these riches, all these blessings. God defended him. Not one soldier died in that battle. And the whole purpose of that was to use Israel as a witness to the rest of the world. Because God wanted to what? Bless all the nations through them. Remember Abraham? And they missed it. And he says, okay, well, these people are going to carry you off. Now, let's go to Daniel, because that's where the story really started. Daniel, and we're only going to do a little bit of chapter 1 today. In the 3rd year of the reign of, I always fail with this one, Jehoiakim, I did better, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. He brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of what? His eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of the time, they might serve before the king. Is that a fulfilling of prophecy right there? Isaiah 39:7 just came true. He went, took the articles from the house of God, and Hezekiah's descendants, the best of them, are going to be taken captive, and they're going to be made eunuchs. Daniel's the one that's writing this account, and he's implying there that he's a eunuch. When they say Ashpenaz is in charge of him, I don't know if you guys had realized that or not. They don't really talk about this, but him and his friends, his companions, were eunuchs. They couldn't have children anymore. And they did this to, well, they were going to be in the palace. They didn't want to worry about their wives. And it would take the aggressive edge off of a man too. Very humiliating, very painful what these young men had to go through. All because the generations before them had failed to glorify God. But the marvelous thing is, now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. To them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. Again, that's implying that Daniel and them were eunuchs. Gave names. He gave the name Daniel. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. And during our Bible studies, we realized that Daniel the name means God is my judge. And his name was, the Babylonian name they gave him means Bel protects his life, or Bel protects the king's life. Hananiah, his Hebrew name means Jehovah is gracious. His name is Shadrach, and it means allegiance to Marduk, a Babylonian god. Mishael means who belongs to God. And his name was changed to what? Meshach, which means what? Who is what a coup is. And that was a Babylonian god of the moon. And then Azariah is changed to Abednego. And Azariah in Hebrew means Jehovah helps. And it was changed to servant of Nabu, or servant of Nebo, the Babylonian god of wisdom. So there's 4 among the group. There was a big group taken. And out of everybody, we only hear about these 4, because out of the entire group of young men that were taken, only 4 honored God. And verse 8 says, "But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore, he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." So, he's taken captive. They didn't suffer the same fate that other people did, that were turned into slaves, into manual labor, into hard labor, and treated like animals and stuff. He was being treated really nice. He was going to be given a great education, the best that you could get at that time in the heathen world. He was going to have the best food and drink that anybody could have. It was what the king was eating. Who ate better than the king? But Daniel says, it purposed in his heart that he didn't want to do anything that would what? Defile him. What is defile? What does that mean? Contaminate, make him dirty. He didn't want to do anything that separated him from God. Anything. You think Daniel, when he's writing this account, he knew the prophecies of his great-grandfather, what had happened with him? Do you think he had read the story of Joseph, how he was carried sold as a slave into Egypt? You think those stories inspired him and touched him, woke something up in him and his companions. We can see that through their names that their parents feared God. All their names were a reference to loyalty to God, to Jehovah. So these young men now are in there, and they're faced with a test. And it's a softer test, and that's usually the ones we fail at. There's a soft pressure. There's a peer pressure. There's a pressure for you. There's a fear of losing peace, of losing comfort, of losing prosperity, of losing approval, of not being accepted, of being the weird one. There's that pressure coming now over him. And in that moment, he makes a decision along with his friends that the others didn't do. He says, I want to please God before I please anybody else. And I'm going to do everything in my part that I can to draw nearer to my God. And I'm going to trust in my God in this place. I'm not going to trust in men. I'm not going to trust in the king of Babylon. I'm not going to trust in my wits. I'm not going to trust in anything but in the living God. I'm going to put my life in his hand, and I don't want to do the most minimum thing to separate me from him. And he goes and he does that, and the wonderful thing is, I'm going to read a couple of verses to you. Verse 9, now God had brought Daniel into the favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. And verse 17, as for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill and literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. And I'm going to read in verse 19 and 20, and among them all, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they served before the king, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all his realm. All right. So, God is so excited now. Now he can work. What the people of Israel didn't learn in the time of peace, now they were going to learn through adversity. They had dishonored him over there, but God, remember, doesn't need a lot. I remember Jonathan's word. He says, God can save with few the same as with many. And now what God couldn't do with an entire country, he's going to do with 4 young men. You see, Nebuchadnezzar and the rest of them thought they had defeated Jehovah. Remember Sennacherib's words. You know, we defeated the king of these people and the king, and then we defeated these people, and their gods weren't able to. So to them, in their mind, when it says that he carried the treasures from the temple of Jehovah and brought them into the house of his God, he was saying, my God defeated Jehovah. And God's name was being dragged through the mud. And now God says, you know, now I'm going to make myself known to these people. And we see the rest of the stories of Daniel. Beautiful how God works miracles to reach these people that could have been reached by Hezekiah a couple of generations before, but he failed. And now God has 4 young men filled with his Holy Spirit that have just decided, you know what, God, we want to be loyal to you no matter what we lose. No matter what happens to us. And these young men we see in the stories after they're thrown into a fiery furnace, they're thrown into a lion's den, and God was there with them. You know why? Because first, they let God into their hearts. And they surrendered all. There was nothing too small that they were willing to do that would separate them even a little bit from God. And there was nothing too great that they could do to get nearer to God. They made that decision. Now, in our times, what does this all mean for us? As the Bible says, these stories are for us. We are living in the middle of Babylon now. You read Revelation. Come out of Babylon. Third angel's message, that's what our whole church is supposed to be about. We're supposed to call people out of Babylon. Are we doing the same thing that Hezekiah did? Misrepresenting God, failing at opportunities to represent God to people who don't know Him? Is our focus on the material things, on the daily lives, our jobs, our careers, our studies, our friends, our social life? Have we forgotten who we are, our identity? We are supposed to be the Abraham. We are supposed to be the Isaac. We are supposed to be that old ancient Israel. Not the idolatrous Israel, the Israel that walked and served with God, the Israel that was conquering everywhere it went. The blessed Israel, the rich Israel, that everybody would say, man, we want to live like them. We want to have what they have. Are you and I representing God to the world through our lives? Or are we just doing it with our lips and telling a different story with our lives? And it's amazing. Throughout the Bible, if we pay attention, human effort is this big, and God does the rest. It's only the willingness. Sometimes it's even just the willingness to be willing. And God does everything else. Remember the story about the boy with the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes? How many people did God feed with that? 5,000. This was just food. But it all started here. If Daniel and his friends had said, you know what? Just pray for the food and ask God to bless it. Just eat it. God understands. We don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to be pointed at as weirdos. We don't want to be fanatics. But we wouldn't have any of the rest of those glorious stories. And God's name wouldn't have been glorified if it wouldn't have started there. And it's in those small things that we usually fail. I'm going to read a couple quotes to you just to wrap this up. First of all, I want you to listen to what glorious things, confessions from kings about God because of these young men. Daniel chapter 2, verse 47, the king answered Daniel and said, "Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret." Same king later on, chapter 3, fiery furnace. Nebuchadnezzar calls to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, "Servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." Verse 28, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies, and they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut into pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this." Chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar again. "I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. He does according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. No one can restrain his hand or say to him, 'What have you done?' At the same time, my reason returned to me," he says. And then verse 37, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all of whose works are truth." and His ways justice. And those who walk in pride, He is able to put down. Darius the Mede, chapter 6. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For He is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and His dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. Time after time, God's name was glorified, and the record set straight. He does not know defeat. He is the one true God. What are people saying about God when they see your life? What God are you preaching with your life? What reputation does God have thanks to you? Thanks to me? God is looking for someone to work with every day. And He gets excited when somebody says, here I am. I don't care what it's going to cost me, because really I have nothing. You have given me everything. When they want to please God above everyone else, wife, husband, mother, father, brother, sister, friend, even themselves, God's name is glorified. Then God says, now I can work. My name, that has been blasphemed among the nations, says, how I will sanctify when I'm sanctified in you. Brothers and sisters, God can work miracles in our lives. God's hand is not broken, it's not tied up. He is not less powerful now than He was when He created the earth. The problem is, He can't find people to work with. He can't find people that He can glorify His name in, because we're valuing more everything else. Let me read you this one quote and we'll finish. Had Daniel so desired, he might have found in his surroundings a plausible excuse for departing from strictly temperate habits. I'm going to jump ahead. Should he disregard the commandment of the Lord, he would retain the favor of the king and secure for himself intellectual advantages and flattering worldly prospects. But Daniel did not hesitate. The approval of God was dearer to him than the favor of the most powerful earthly potentate, dearer than life itself. Dearer than life itself. Daniel had come to know God and gave Him his heart. And, I love like when Hananiah and the other guys say, even if God doesn't decide to save us from this fiery furnace, we will not honor your gods. They didn't care that it would cost them their lives. Why? Because they had come to know the true God, really known the true God in their life. And they knew nothing was worth more than pleasing that God. God bless you this morning.